Hi everyone, so this is week 3, so as you know in the series, this week we're going to be focusing on Asian Americans or Pacific Islanders, and again just to very make clear, we are going to be covering those ideas of active listening, being respectful, all those traditional, or not traditional, but therapeutic approaches clinically. But this one is a very little bit different. So we'll get to it. So with Asian Americans, and again, this is a population according to this, going back to the census. This is a growing population, and there is many probably clinicians or maybe just anyone you be working with, if not part of that population. I'm not going to necessarily split Asian America, because Asian Americans, and that would be considered, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, South Korean, Vietnamese, those things, and then Pacific Islanders, more Indonesia, those areas. So for me, I don't like necessarily clumping them together because they do have their own unique cultures. But for this, I am going to more lump it together. But again, that's just a disclosure. So from my experience, I've worked with both couples and families from both heritages, and it has been the same experience for me. So just want to get that out there. Okay, so with Asian Americans, the first thing that I've been working with my families is, the first thing that always comes up is the conversation between beliefs and values between mental health and physical health, right? So the connection between the mind and body and spirit. So this is why using, again, if you've covered the biopsychosocial spiritual model, that is a really good model to work with this population or this culture. But the main important piece here, which I want to get across, is mental health is strongly related to the physical health. So maybe some symptoms you have physically, for example, anxiety, may come up as stomach aches. You'll see this also with kind of more Middle Eastern or Muslim or those sort of populations too. But this is more somatic. So you're going to have a lot of those mental health connections a lot with the somatic work. So, and one family, for example, which I've worked with, very cognitive based, right? So if you're coming into the session, don't really want to talk about it, but if you have a positive mindset, you can get through it, right? We don't think negatively. And I've had clients say this, is like, well, no, if I think negatively, then of course I'm going to be ill. So gotta always think positive, think positive, think positive, think positive. I had a client from Vietnam who was that way. So if you're working with clients, know that difference, right? Know that there's a strong connection between the physical and also that mental health piece, emotional. Another piece that is also important to understand is that there is that psychological level of distress, right? These families may come, well, this is not a recollection of me. Usually it's a recollection of the whole family. So it can be a major stigma for therapy sessions. You may not, either you're going to get underserved or they're not going to even come to treatment whatsoever. So when you have that family in there, addressing that, if they don't bring it up, has been, in my experience, very important. So the stigma around mental health, maybe there's shame, embarrassment, there may be, like I said, just a lot of mental anguish over just even presenting to mental health treatment. So that's something as a clinician to be aware of too. The third thing, and probably most importantly, which is to address, and you'll probably learn this as well, but I've had other clients from Korea, from everywhere, who would say to me in words like, well, I am kind of like the model minority, right? So people expect me to do the best, right? So that results in a lot of self-induced pressure. So you've been placed on this minority population to feel like, well, I've got to be the best, right? Because this is what I'm perceived as, like best at schooling, best at education, best in occupation. But it's not always that way, right? We can't just, again, lump a population based on if they're perceived as this model minority. Yeah, you may have a lot of Asian cultures who their strong values are to work on being a doctor or being a lawyer or being these really, high-end specialized things. But not a lot of people are. So as a clinician, we got to get through our mind, or as just a person in general, we've got to be able to recognize, well, we can't just lump everything into that. There may be some really highly ambitious, but also there's people wanting to live, and it's not like that across the world. Obviously Asian American or Pacific Islanders, it may be different, but so yeah, going back to academic success, and also having a conversation of like just the history of being misdiagnosed or underdiagnosed. That's led to a lot of mistrust in the system. I know I've had families come to me and say, well, I don't believe I have that diagnosis. I don't believe I have that. And to some degree, from Eastern cultures, where it has more of a holistic approach versus here in the States, it is more individualistic, right? It's a medical model. It's a different medical approach. So there may be some symptoms which may be named, and I don't know off the top of my head what the name of them are, but depression is named differently over there. I'm gonna have to put a reference to this, but I'll send that later on. But they call it a little bit different. So if you're not doing that assessment and you're not really checking in with them, make sure you ask that, right? What do you think this problem is? What do you think this concern is? Rather than just jumping to, oh, well, you have a diagnosis, right? So those are more Asian Americans. Now, Pacific Islanders, pretty similar from my experience across the board with those similar things. But, it's the close-knit community I've seen, right? They are very, very honorable, very culture-based, very diverse group. So many different islands, so many different things from one to the other. So making sure you don't just, again, Pacific Islander is from, French Polynesia, from Indonesia. Like, it's not going to be the same. So again, we got to be making sure we ask every single time, what is your location? Where are you from? If you don't know, what is that like for you? So that's really important to make sure. So kind of based off all those things, as a person dealing or working with this culture, we want to be aware of these inaccurate stereotypes, right? The stereotypes of, well, you just want to be a doctor, or you just want to have the highest education. Well, some people, yes, but not everyone. So don't lump them into that, or lump this population into that, stereotypicalize this population. Also be just aware of these diverse cultures, traditions, Eastern approaches, diagnoses of their own, all very important. And then lastly, just making sure that we're not working with based off kind of the medical model over here, just purely what we call a DSM over here. Like, there may be a different approach on how they call that concern. But the biggest thing which I've seen is that cognitive control, right? So they may present as stubborn because that's not what they present as, or just, if my mind is right, then I have to be right. It's not them pushing back against your work. It's more the fact, well, maybe you have to change your interventions up a little bit. Just being aware of the cultural changes there, or the barriers that may face. A lot of those, like I said, even here in the United States, with all the history of trauma, again, it's another intergenerational trauma with what happened in, all the wars. So there is some level of mistrust, but as long as you are respecting and understanding what their values are, going back to their roots, understanding, well, how did you do this in your family? And if you are been here over a couple of years, well, what does that look like? So I guess the only suggested treatment is really looking at more indigenous healing practices. Do they use an Eastern approach to healing? And if so, because I know I've had a case where, they were doing some healing and it may look like some marks on a certain kid, but that was, when you talk about the cupping, you talk about other things, that was just a ritual that they had. But if I wasn't aware of that cultural heritage, I wasn't aware of that healing practice, I would have been calling, child welfare services and making a report. But until I had that conversation with them, they explained it in depth. I did my research, and it was that. So just don't jump ahead into that. So yeah, that was a very kind of broad idea of Pacific Islanders or idea of Asian Americans. And again, if you have any questions, just give me a call. And so next week we'll be talking more about Middle East and Muslim populations. We'll see you next week. All right, have a good one.